We wanted to start off by just celebrating Pride Month. As everyone knows, June is Pride Month. The CFAR recognizes and celebrates the LGBTQIA+ community. And there's a link to Pride-related activities in DC available through our weekly update if you want to take a look at that. So we just thought we'd acknowledge that important month. Next slide. So just very briefly, for those of you who are not familiar with the CFAR, we are in our 13th year. Our mission is to intensify our multi-institutional effort to support research that contributes to ending the HIV epidemic in DC in partnership with government and community. You can see that we currently have on the bottom 280 investigator members at 9 collaborating organizations, and you can see the logos of those organizations on the slide. We have a highly engaged community partnership council, many of whom are on the call tonight and will be speaking tonight. We provide core services and pilot award programs. We promote academic community dialogue through 8 scientific working and interest groups, and we're engaged in multiple diversity, equity, and inclusion HIV research training initiatives. Next slide. The agenda for tonight, after my very brief welcome, I'll be turning it over to the CTU director, Dr. Manya Magnus. She'll be giving you an overview of the CTU, and then Melissa Turner, who will be introduced later, will be talking about community engagement, and Dr. Henn from Whitman Walker and Dr. Siegel from GW will be enlightening us about the ACTG and HPTN, and we will finish with a Q&A session, and we promise we always end on time. We will adjourn at 6:30, if not earlier. Next slide. In all of our citywides, we always thank the many different organizations that are represented on the call today. This is among those who had registered. You can just take a quick look at it to see the breadth of people who are registered, of organizations where they come from, even from Cornell, which is nice to see, in New York, and Treatment Action Group and Merck, and in addition to all our DC area institutions, University of Maryland, NIH. So we really appreciate everybody turning out for our citywides, which are our signature events. Next slide. And we're sorry if we missed anybody. We just have one last announcement before starting the seminar. We want, as everybody probably saw in the weekly update, we're announcing the return of the DC CFAR Scientific Symposium in 2023. This is the first time we've convened the CFAR community in person, although there'll be a virtual option since the pandemic began. So we're extremely excited about this. We're planning it on Tuesday, October 10th. It'll be an all-day affair with lunch, and it will be at the GW School of Public Health. And there'll be lots of information about the agenda and speakers forthcoming through the weekly update in the weeks ahead. Next slide. So with that, I'll turn it over to our wonderful team of investigators who are going to enlighten us about the DC CTU. Dr. Magnus is the DC CFAR co-director and also the director of the CTU, and she'll be introducing the rest of our speakers. Manya.
Thanks so much, Dr. Greenberg and CFAR team. I'm really delighted to be here and share with you some of the work we've been doing, not just for the last 3 years, but really for over the last decade. It's delightful to see so many of you are part of this effort. So I'm going to be telling you things you already know, but hopefully this will galvanize forces of those of you who don't know what we're doing to join us in some capacity. And we're going to give you a little sort of overview of the CTU, and then we're going to allow a lot of time for questions. And I hope that those of you from the CTU team, and I see many of you, will chime in and answer questions when it comes up, because it definitely is a wonderful team effort, and we're eager to engage the entire District of Columbia in this. So with that, I'm going to share my screen. Just give me one moment. Can everybody see that? Great. Okay. So briefly, what we're going to cover is, Alan just referenced it, and you can see that here. But we really want to give you a landscape so you can see what we've been doing, where you can get involved, where you can refer participants, and where investigators can be involved. And then we're going to have a lot of time for questions. I do want to acknowledge our funder, of course, NIH, and you can see our grant number there, and we have no conflicts to disclose. So I personally have my own timeline involved with the networks, which is my whole career started early on in the pediatric ACTG. So I'm very fond of the networks, and you're going to learn a little bit about those networks tonight in case you don't already know about them. But one thing that's really important is to know that the clinical trials infrastructure in the United States and largely around the globe is really embedded with almost all of the major landmark discoveries that have occurred since the beginning of the HIV pandemic. And you can see here on the right, the timeline of HIV, and actually in most of these landmark moments, all the way from the identification of the virus to AZT, to perinatal interruption of perinatal transmission with ACTG 076, to protease inhibitor development, to treatment as prevention, to PrEP, to PEP, all the way to where we are now, all started with the networks, which is this wonderful collaboration of investigators around the world who work together to try to conquer the biggest scientific problems in HIV. So what are the DATES-funded networks? Just right here, you can see a very lovely slide that's produced by AVAC, and you can learn more about it at the website located on the bottom. But the NIH-funded HIV Trials Networks, a family tree, visually identifies the sort of the evolution of the networks. And this is a large way that groups of scientists can collaborate, leveraging infrastructure to ensure rapid development of new techniques to stop HIV, to treat it, to prevent it, to cure it. And then they've evolved over time. So these infrastructure awards have changed since the early 90s. And you can see that they are sort of color coded here, but you can see in the early days, there was a pediatric ACTG, the adult AIDS clinical trials group, and so forth. And then each decade or so, they evolved to meet the needs of the people and the world with and at risk of HIV. And then over time, they've sort of consolidated. So here we are, 2021-27. This is the cycle that we're in now, although our collective involvement has predated this particular cycle. And the DATES-funded HIV clinical trials networks actually has 4 key areas. 1, maternal and pediatric treatment, prevention, and vaccines. And one thing we're going to talk about a little bit is how these are intersecting and overlapping to best support those people with and at risk for HIV. So to tell you a little bit more about where the District of Columbia Clinical Trials Unit fits into that, you can see here that in 2020, right there in the the beginning of our COVID pandemic, there were 35 clinical trials units that were funded. Now, those particular 35 CTUs provide scientific leadership and administrative expertise and infrastructure to conduct a host of clinical trials that leverage scientific expertise, operational expertise, regulatory ability, and patient care to ensure that people have access to clinical trials. It also helps ensure that people can get adequate sample size, because many of you know, you need a lot of sample size to do large studies, and the networks can get that more than individual investigators can independently. Globally, there are 35 around the world, and each CTU supports about up to 8 clinical research sites, from between 2 and 8. And that overall, the whole globe, and you can see them there in red dots, the CTUs support 101 clinical research sites in 18 countries across North America, South America, Africa, and Asia. And that includes 45 sites in the United States, of which we are several. So here you can see that we have in the clinical trials unit here in DC, we have a very interesting and unique DC-focused clinical trials unit that embraces prevention and treatment. The George Washington University HIV Prevention Trials Network site, clinical research site, also known as a CRS, is what Dr. Siegel will talk about. And the Whitman Walker Institute AIDS Clinical Trials Group, clinical research site, is what Dr. Hen will talk about. And they lead each of those CRSs with a wonderful team of people, and all of us work together in the umbrella organization that's the Clinical Trials Unit. What does a clinical trials unit do, and what do the networks do? Well, it's really important to notice that we are part of a large family. And again, I'm always impressed and moved by the breadth of collaboration across the networks. And they manage everything from laboratory, clinical site monitoring to ensure we have adequate data mechanisms in place to get the best data We have clinical research management, we have data management, we have regulatory support to pursue applications with FDA, the EMA, or other organizations that help drug safety. We have all sorts of community engagement across the networks, which allow us to hear from people who are eligible to be in the trials or in communities that are represented by the trials. So the funded networks the NIH helps us do our work better through these shared resources. And it also lends economies of scale because we want to make sure that we're using the taxpayers' dollars the best we can. So we don't want to duplicate all these services. So the networks help us by making sure that that doesn't happen. I want to just note here that when we applied for the CTU in 2019, there's a little tiny footnote which said, just tell us how you'll be ready to pivot to other diseases, should they occur. Nobody thought pandemic might occur, but in fact it did. So one of the beauties of the entire network is that we are able, with this unique skill set of extremely skilled staff, clinicians, researchers, to pivot rapidly. And in fact, as you know, in 2020, we did actually get another pandemic, and the networks were really incredibly important to leverage the skills of the scientists and people in the networks to actually implement both treatment trials for COVID and vaccine trials. So both the Whitman Walker Clinical Research Site and the GW Clinical Research Site both did a lot of COVID's trials. Some of them are still ongoing. And that is partly how come we were able to have such a quick vaccine, such quick treatments, because this infrastructure was leveraged to help COVID. So next time you're writing a grant application and you see there's a little footnote that says, what would you do if there were another pandemic and how would you approach it? It's not a rhetorical question. It might actually happen, and it did for us. And we feel grateful that we were able to be so much a part of the effort to stop and prevent COVID. So just briefly, and I'm almost done, and I'll turn it over to Melissa, I want to share with you the specific aims for our clinical trials unit. The first aim is to provide scientific leadership and administrative infrastructure to conduct treatment and prevention trials at these two established sites. Now, again, our CTU is unique because we have a city focus. So our goal is to attract people, both scientists and participants and community members, into our group so that we can work together and use this infrastructure to provide cutting edge clinical trials to our community here in DC. We work to implement best practices to ensure continued high recruitment and retention. Participant safety is a priority, of course, laboratory, pharmacy, data, and regulatory excellence. And we've achieved this, and we're very proud of that. We actively engage with the local community, and Melissa's going to talk to you a lot about that. We've always been grounded in a very robust community relationship and partnership, and the CTU would not function without that connection with the community. So we want to use good participatory practices to conduct all of our work, all the way from conception of ideas, implementation of studies, to dissemination. And finally, we like to capitalize on the resources available from the wonderful groups in our midst, including the CFAR, the DC cohort, which Dr. Castell leads. We want to engage senior investigators as well as mentor early stage investigators to engage in this terrific network and really identify the need for programmatic priorities and to implement them. I want to highlight that in years 3 through 7, so we were funded in 2020, and we will be funded until 2027. This aim 4 is partly why we're here. We really want to share with you what we're doing so that we can engage people further and look for new ways to mentor early stage investigators to become involved in the clinical trials infrastructure. So we're going to tell you a little bit about that, and then we hope that this opens up an ongoing dialogue with you. There are a lot of ways to engage. We're going to talk about community engagement that Melissa will talk about. We're expanding our community advisory boards so that we can have new educational offerings, joint engagements that Melissa will talk about. We are developing new, and this is sort of new for us, so we look forward to input and ways you think we might be able to enhance this, for potential for students and junior faculty to work with us, to train and provide mentorship about the clinical trials infrastructure, to work on the network level. There is a lot of opportunity to share clinical trials data that we can talk about in the question and answers period. Usually these data are not available for current studies because, as you can imagine, those need to be retained to answer the primary research questions. However, there's about 20 to 30 years worth of data available that the networks make available to investigators that are even not funded by the networks, and we want to help you access that if that's of interest. We have resources to refer people to studies, people who are on studies we want to refer from to other community-based organizations, so there can be a very nice exchange, and we're looking forward to telling you about that. Interfacing, of course, with the CFAR and the cohort. And then before I close, I just want to highlight two of our new things that were part of our year 3 aims, our newsletter and our website. So I want to give a shout out to Christian Morris, who's on the call, I believe. Hi, Christian. Christian is as you know, the CFAR is a wonderful family. So Christian was working with Whitman Walker when we started, now works with us, helping us, another CFAR member, and has worked with our CTU for about the past year or so, enhancing our communications with extraordinary skill. Because of Christian, we have a terrific new newsletter. And if you're interested in becoming a subscriber to this free newsletter, let me know, put your name in the chat, and we can send it along to you. We also have, thanks to Christian, a terrific new website at the dcctu.org, and it has a host of resources and information. And so this is part of our year 3 aim. And I just want to give a huge shout out to Christian for making this happen. It went from a vision to something implemented well beyond that vision, thanks to Christian. But we have a lot of information about the CTU history, how we evolved, the prevention research, the treatment research, and how to get involved. So that's another avenue for involvement. So I will stop there. We're going to have a lot of time for questions, and we'll be happy to answer that in the last part of the session. But thank you for your attention. Thank you for joining us on this journey, and for your support of the Clinical Trials Unit. And I'm delighted to turn it over now to Melissa.
Thank you, Manya. Thank you. Can everyone hear me? Oh, wonderful. I am Melissa Turner, and I'm a social worker. I'm sitting here at my office at the Veterans Hospital here in Washington, D.C., where I do serve veterans in the infectious diseases section. It's been my esteemed, proud honor to partner with initially with George Washington University, with the HIV Prevention Trials Network, and now with Whitman Walker Institute and the AIDS Clinical Trials Group, as we partner and collaborate for the District of Columbia Clinical Trials Unit. And I'm happy to discuss our community engagement in HIV prevention and treatment trials. This is a very exciting venture, and it's wonderful to be with all of you today to discuss how we have journeyed to this point in time in this place. We're very excited about the potential partnership and the goals and the innovative initiatives that we can build together as part of the DC CTU. And we thank all of you for being with us this evening. And just going to the next slide, I just wanted to open up with a discussion on how we want to center community engagement. Now, Manya discussed the many networks that have been a part of the Division of AIDS, and it really took me down memory lane as to my history with the AIDS Clinical Trials Group. I have been affiliated with that group for some time and have attended their meetings and know of their excellence and their contributions in developing treatments for people living with HIV, for hepatitis work, TB work, and COVID work. And my work with the HIV Prevention Trials Network, where we are seeking tools and in the toolbox for HIV prevention. And we have engaged and done behavioral work, and in our quest to find remedies for reducing HIV incidence globally. And several of the networks have been involved with structural research, looking at stigma or looking at the impact of policy. But regardless of the kind of work that we are doing, whether it's treatment trials, prevention trials, or embedded behavioral studies, or other kinds of analysis, community engagement stands at the center of all that we do. It stands at the center to inform, to advise, and to guide all the research that we are doing involving human participants. And so I begin with that theme because it undergirds and serves as the foundation for all that we do. We are here this evening to continue a conversation of how we can engage the community and listen and learn more from the community about how, what the needs are, what the priorities are, what the interests are of our local community. And so while we are here at this day and time on a Thursday evening in June, please contact and reach out to any of us on this call who are presenting on this call if you have ideas that can inform the biomedical agenda of our research networks, the ACTG and the HPTN, or behavioral or structural research that we might be involved in, or any ideas that you might have, because we believe that community is at the center of all that we want to do in our work as we come together as a clinical trials unit in the District of Columbia region. So moving to the next slide, I wanted to begin with discussing the legacy of community engagement of these two networks that are represented by the DC Clinical Trials Unit. And I begin with the AIDS Clinical Trials Group, because I do believe that they are the oldest of the Division of AIDS networks. So I think it's makes sense to begin there. The ACTG was established in the mid-1980s, and it is the world's largest, I believe, and longest running of the HIV clinical trial networks. And community engagement in HIV research began with the AIDS Clinical Trials Group system in response to direct action and activism and the demand from people living with HIV to have to be empowered to impact the research available for HIV. And their mission is to cure HIV infection and to reduce the burden of disease of HIV infection and its complications. And they are a global network. And I have included photographs here from a project called They Became My Family. It's a portrait gallery celebrating the diverse communities that are represented in the ACTG. Again, it's a global network, and they have photographs here of some of their community advisory board entities from around the world. And again, they have been engaging and involving community since the mid-1980s, and the concerns of diverse communities impacted by the HIV epidemic are represented by what's known as the Global Community Advisory Board in the ACTG. There are 70 plus sites that compose the ACTG, and every site has a community advisory board that is represented in the ACTG network meetings. We'll be meeting on next week together as a network and also as a community group for the ACTG. And again, we are here this evening with the Whitman Walker Institute, which represents one of those sites that are part of the ACTG. And they have a community advisory board, of course, that is one of the 70 plus that are composed of the Global Community Advisory Board under the ACTG. And I love the vibrancy of these pictures where they are working to just document their legacy of community engagement in the ACTG. And at the bottom there, you can see Jane from Cleveland, Orbit Clanton is from New York. I wish I had a pointer, but he's centered here at the bottom of the slide. And I also included some photographs from the public domain of the Whitman Walker Institute because they too have been deeply connected with their community, having served the DC community for 50 years now. I believe they're in their fifth decade of service in our town. So they are closely aligned with the community, and we want to leverage and they have leveraged their relationships with the community to inform their community advisory board that's linked with the ACTG. And moving to the next slide, just to celebrate the legacy of community engagement in the HIV Prevention Trials Network. This too is also a global network focusing on serving persons who could benefit the most from prevention interventions. The HPTN engages trial participants as well, their families, partners, neighbors, coworkers, local community members, policymakers, but they also do direct advocacy work with civil society groups, with pastors, traditional healers, tribal chiefs. I've met with ministries of health as part of my work with the HPTN. They too have a strong and organized approach to community engagement that relies on advisory structures that we refer to as community working groups. Each site within the HPTN has its own community advisory board that represents participants by raising research-related issues or concerns that may impact the local community. And I've included in this picture set that upper right there is actually the GW team. I want to say this was some 064 field work reaching women who are vulnerable to HIV. We have representatives from the Houston team. I think the bottom left is our Kenya site. Fia Cruz there is in the middle. And I also plugged in some of the, I think this is a picture from the 094 team that's working to recruit persons who inject drugs into prevention work in the HPTN. So we are proud that our clinical trials unit here in Washington, DC represents two networks and the Division of AIDS networks that has a long legacy of community engagement that we will continue as a DC CTU. So moving to the next slide, we want to coordinate community engagement between the Whitman Walker Institute Clinical Research Site under the guise of the AIDS Clinical Trials Group and the George Washington University Clinical Research Site under the HIV Prevention Trials Network. Both of these sites are highly regarded sites with deep roots in the community. We want to leverage those relationships with those communities to build a joint or collaborative effort that is the DC CTU. We have joined these two groups together under one umbrella, but it's very, very important to make the point, we are not twins, we are not identical. We're not look alike, sound alike, okay? We are not mirrors of each other. It is not a merger. As I've worked with community to try to introduce the concept of the CTU, there's been some misunderstanding that we're becoming one or we're supposed to look alike and be alike. We believe that the distinctive differences of these two clinical research sites and the community engagement structures that support them, that the differences is part of our strength, that the Whitman Walker Institute is focusing on treatment trials and that the George Washington University is focusing on prevention trials. This is our strength, that we have diversity that coexists and is harmonized under one clinical trials unit that is the DC CTU. We are collaborators, we are partners, and we want to leverage our unique expertise in treatment and prevention to create a coordinated research entity here in the District of Columbia. We believe that this is part of our strength. And we're very proud of the differences that we bring to the CTU. I'm concerned that I'm running out of time, so we better move to the next slide. I do want to revisit the guiding principles of good participatory practice. And you can go ahead with the slide set so that we can see what these principles are. There is a funding opportunity announcement that we responded to and that we competed for and won. And that funding opportunity announcement for clinical trials units said specifically that the CTUs will engage in a productive partnership in the communities in which clinical research will be conducted that is consistent with good participatory practice. So in our response to that funding opportunity announcement, we, at that initial stage, mapped out a plan using the GPP principles to engage community. We want to respect the humanity of our community, and we want to include them as meaningful partners, leveraging our established relationships to build a research plan. We want to learn from our community. This is not a top-down initiative. We want to learn from our community and partner with our community members so they can inform us of what we need to know to develop sound science within this community. And we want to do so with integrity. And you can continue down with the slides. We want to be fully transparent, open, and honest in our communications and our information sharing. This is why we are with you tonight. We're going to continue to come to the community to update you on our science, on our research, on our approach, on our goals, and we ask that you partner with us to inform this process, to be a part of what we are doing, and to be a part of this initiative. We are accountable to our community. We are accountable to you. We want to deliver scientifically sound research that is guided by ethical principles. And our community stakeholders, you are accountable to the entities that you represent to provide honest feedback to us that you can support science, or you can say, I cannot support that. We want to hear the honest feedback from our community partners, and you have the autonomy to support research that we are doing and to verbalize to us that we need to make some adjustments to the work that we're doing. And we welcome your feedback. We want to hear your honest thoughts on the work that we're doing. And moving to the next slide, even though the funding opportunity announcement did not outline the recommendations for community engagement in HIV research, I believe that these principles work in tandem with good participatory practices. And you can just run down the full slide, Lorena. We want to set clear goals with our community. We want to meet the needs of our community by having listening sessions just as this, so that we can talk about what the priorities should be for our clinical trials unit. We want to learn about our community. I started HIV work at DC General in 1988. In the 1980s, this city has changed tremendously in terms of the demographics, the economic needs, the perceptions of the community. So we have to continue to listen to our community to know what's happening out there. And we ask you to offer your feedback and input. We want to be aware of what's happening culturally, and we're humble enough to listen and to learn from our community partners. I've talked about transparency. We know that distrust of research enterprises can be a difficult issue for our community. We want to continue to build partnerships and answer questions and be a tool to build bridges with the local community members who may have concerns about research in our community. And we are deeply committed to being here for the long term. We're not here to do helicopter research to circle in and circle out. Whitman Walker has been serving this community for decades. George Washington University has been here for a very, very long time. We are here for the long term to serve our communities, and we're committed to maintaining long-term partnerships. And moving to the next slide, I just want to share some of the activities that we have done to date as part of the clinical trials unit, as part of our, when we were planning our response to the funding opportunity announcement, and how we have executed the plan and activities since we were funded. We've been listening to the community. We've been gathering information. We attempted to do a survey. There wasn't a strong response, but there was some response. A lot of our community members have been asking, what is a CTU? And we try to clarify what the role of the CTU is. So we're informing and educating the community. We're building relationships. I've been attending the CAB meetings of the Whitman Walker Institute. Members of the Whitman Walker Institute ACTG CAB have been a part of HPTN CAB meetings. So we've had some cross-CAB attendance so that we can learn from each other and build around some shared goals. We're sharing updates on our research projects. We want the Whitman Walker CAB members to know about HPTN studies and vice versa. We're sharing recruitment strategies, and we're cross-referring as appropriate. We have these big full week annual meetings. We want to share themes from those meetings. We're getting ready for the ACTG meeting on next week. And I'd like to share with our ACTG partners themes and lessons learned from the HPTN meetings that just concluded on this week. So instead of there being silos of separate meetings, we want there to be some cross communication about the goals of these networks. We think that's healthy for our DC CTU. We want to continue to solicit ideas on topics of interest from both CABs. We had feedback that there was interest in injectables. There was some confusion about how injectables work for pre-exposure prophylaxis versus injectables for treatment. So we had in March of last year a CAB meeting for both our CABs, where we had a volunteer from Whitman Walker talk about her experience with injectables for treatment. We had a clinical trial participant from the cabotegravir study to discuss his experience with using injectables for PrEP. This was a really nice opportunity for both CABs to learn from research going on in our communities with a new tool, injectables. So that was a very exciting project. I too want to thank Christian for his work with building out our social media. We are in the infancy of our social media, but it is our community members who have said, we want more presence in the social media space to deliver our messages around clinical trials and research and community engagement. And we're very grateful for the persistent request that we provide face-to-face consultation and education, but also social media presence for the DC CTU. And our CABs have been very informative as to the content of that, of our newsletters that are available at the website. And we're very grateful for Christian Morris's facilitation of our introduction into the social media space. This is part of our plan to build out a community partnership and engagement with community members. Other topics of interest that our community have communicated to us that they're interested in learning more about that are meaningful to both CABs, meaningful to both the treatment CAB and also the prevention CAB members is our opioid epidemic here in Washington. Aging is an issue. And this is an issue for people aging with HIV, but it also has implications for how older people can prevent HIV acquisition. COVID is still an issue. It might be less of an issue, but certainly both CAB members, both were interested in how we might be able to collaborate and understand better how to manage through the COVID epidemic. Mpox, again, a threat that just came from nowhere practically and was of concern to both of our CAB communities. And we were able to provide some education to our CAB communities, and there's interest in learning more about the potential for future outbreaks. Ongoing research for both networks was of interest for our CAB members. We know that 083 was a breaking study for the HPTN. Reprieve was is another study that is of interest that we have new information on its effectiveness. We'll learn more at the ACTG meeting on next week, but our CAB members are saying that they want to hear more about these breakthroughs from both of these networks. And protocol review and how we can unpack CAB drafts that come through both networks are of interest of our community advisory board members. So these are just some of the topics of interest for our community that we've heard from thus far. We welcome feedback from this group tonight and onward as we go forward in the future. You are welcome to get involved with these CABs with our CABs and our CTU effort as community members, and we welcome your partnership. And just moving to the final slide, I think it's the final slide, we wanted to share how you can get in contact with us. You can contact anyone on this slide. Whitman Walker Institute, the CRS is led by Sarah Henn. Avery Whippleberg is on this evening's call as well and is available. And Chanton Tulliver will be involved with some community engagement and CAB liaison work for Whitman Walker Institute. And for George Washington University, you see the contacts there, Dr. Magnus, Dr. Siegel, Hannah Yellen is on the call. She's a supervisor for the site, and myself, I'm Melissa Turner. We're open to hearing from anyone here about any ideas or feedback, thoughts, support, criticism, any feedback that you want to offer about our plan thus far. We're open to your input as we mold and pull together and cull together a plan to execute a successful CTU for DC. So thank you for your attention. Thank you for being here. And I'll turn it over to the next presenter. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Melissa. So it's an honor to be here today and to talk a little bit about our clinical research site at Whitman Walker Institute, our ACTG Clinical Trials Group. Next slide, please. So first, just to briefly review the mission of the ACTG is really focused around finding a cure for HIV and to reduce the burden of disease due to HIV infection, and also looks at long-term comorbidities and other viral infections such as hepatitis and TB clinical trials. The group was established in 1987, and through the course of the work, and particularly as Manya even mentioned, with COVID, we've recognized that there's a really opportunity to leverage the network to look at other viral infections through the network. So next slide, please. So from the beginning, the ACTG has been on the front lines of the epidemic. One of the first breakthrough trials that the ACTG conducted in the 80s was ACTG trial 175, which looked at AZT alone compared to combinations therapy. And as we all know now, that it's some of this research that went on to show that combination therapy or highly active antiretroviral therapy was going to be key to learning how to control the virus and for people living healthy lives with HIV. But as the epidemic has progressed and as treatment has progressed, the ACTG also recognized that the burden of HIV really was laid outside of the United States. In South Central America, in Africa, in Southeast Asia. And so in 2002, clinical research sites were opened internationally. Next slide, please. So today there are 41 US clinical research sites for the ACTG and 33 international sites. And as you can see, they are focused in areas with a disproportional burden of HIV. Currently, there are 33 active ongoing trials within the ACTG network focusing on HIV, hepatitis C, hepatitis B, TB, as well as COVID. And there are 13 trials that are currently open and enrolling. Next slide, please. At Whitman Walker, so we're located on the 14th Street corridor. We currently have 2 active sites where we're involved in clinical research, our 1525 location and then our Liz location. 1525 on 14th Street is also one of our clinical sites. It's where we see patients clinically, and we also do clinical trials out of 1525. And then Liz is our administrative site and also has clinical research space. But I also really wanted to take this opportunity to talk about our new Max Robinson Center. The photo is on the bottom of the photograph there. This center is up. You could go visit it now, and Ward 8 is there. The insides are being built out, and we're looking to move in for clinical care actually in August. So this is like rapidly approaching. The second and third floor of this building will also be dedicated to research. The third floor will be all applied research, and the second floor will be clinical research. I'll do a shout out to Dr. Jonathan Rendina, who's our Senior Director of Research. He did an amazing job, and we were applying for an NIH grant that was funded that will allow us to build out that second floor for clinical research. And I think this is a really important equity issue for us and for the city and community, because this will be a state-of-the-art research facility located in Ward 8. And this is where the research facility won't open until 2024, probably into 2024, as the build out is happening later, but that's going to be really exciting for us and is where all our ACTG research will move to when it does open. Next slide, please. So the ACTG Amazing. So this is actually the title of our Microsoft Teams chat. I think Lindsay titled us that, but it's absolutely true. We have an incredible team of investigators, research specialists who work to make our AC trials and our clinical research site come alive and work with patients. And they are all listed here. Many of them have been involved with ACTG going on 10 years now and bring an enormous breadth and depth of experience to the team. Next slide, please. So our clinical research team, not only are they involved in enrolling patients and working at the site, but they are also involved in the network level. And this gives, this shows how they've been involved. Avery has done an amazing job with the site operations subcommittee. She is currently the chair of that committee. And they do all the exciting work looking at how the study coordinators are trained and educated, how data and quality is managed and improved, and how source documentation is how source documentation is done. And so a lot of this is kind of the nitty-gritty of research, but it's the critical work that makes studies function. So they have been incredible on that work. And then we also have investigators who've been involved in the hepatitis transformation science group, the cure transformation science group, and the women's collaborative. And then Christian Morris, who has already gotten other shout outs this for the website for the CTU, when he was at Women Walker, was also on the outreach, recruitment, and retention working group for the network and did important work in community engagement. So that has been great. Next slide, please. So this is a list of all of the ongoing studies we currently have at Whitman Walker with the ACTG. I'm not going to read through them in verbatim. The ones in green are the ones that are openly enrolling. But as you read through this list, you can see there are a couple kind of buckets that trials generally follow into. There are some very early phase trials, investigational trials working towards HIV cure. There are also trials in this list that are really looking at the at comorbidities and that people with HIV often struggle with. So like PREVE trial is an example of that. There are also several hepatitis trials on this list. The other bucket of studies that are part of the ACTG are TB trials, and those are generally done internationally, and we aren't involved in any of those. Next slide, please. I wanted to highlight the Do It trial. So this is one of our trials that we're currently enrolling for. And this trial is really trying to get to the bottom of excessive weight gain that many patients struggle with who are on ARVs. And so I think this is a really important trial, but it's also been a harder trial to enroll than we had anticipated. So we are particularly looking for women who are living with HIV, who have a BMI over 30, are on a TAF regimen with a TAF-INSTI regimen, and have been on that stable regimen for over 48 weeks. And we're really trying to assess whether a switch to doravirine helps their weight to stabilize or if they lose weight. Next slide, please. I also wanted to just highlight 2 upcoming studies that we have. These will be opening in the fall and we'll start enrolling in them. One is called the Latitude study, and it is going to look at long-acting injectable therapy, so Cabenuva, for people who have struggled to be adherent to oral medication and are not HIV virally suppressed. The other study that we're really excited about that will also be opening this fall is the Get It Right study. And this is a study focused on transgender women and estrogen therapy, and is really designed to start to look at some of the pharmacokinetic interactions between estrogen and antiretroviral therapy and get a better understanding of those interactions. So it's something that's very important for transgender women in our community who are living with HIV. Next slide, please. And then kind of as I wrap up, I wanted to talk about some of the things that are currently coming out of ACTG. Melissa mentioned that the Reprieve, the ACTG annual meeting is next week. It is open to the public. And the Reprieve trials, they will be presented on Tuesday at 5 p.m. But last month, this trial was stopped early when it was found that the participants who took pivastatin lowered their risk of a major adverse cardiovascular event by 35% compared to placebo. So this is really a groundbreaking trial for the network, and it's really the first clinical trial to look at a preventive approach to cardiovascular disease in people living with HIV. And we know that that has been a problem for folks. We see earlier onset of cardiovascular disease in those living with HIV. And this study really looked at folks who weren't considered to be high risk for cardiovascular disease. So these are folks that would not have been recommended to have a statin, be prescribed a statin otherwise. They were given statins, and there was a real benefit to that. So I think this is a study that is going to change the recommendations for how we treat and manage HIV for folks. So a really important study. Next slide, please. The other study that will be presented this coming week at the ACTG meeting, and something that's been in the media a lot, is GLP-1 agonists. So there's been a lot of interest with GLP-1 agonists in terms of weight loss. There's also been work done looking at fatty liver disease. And this is a study that was completed within the ACTG, and the study analysis will be presented next week. But it was looking at folks living with HIV who had non-alcoholic fatty liver disease and the effects of semaglutide on that. So we're going to be excited to see if there was a decreased hepatic fat with therapy, and we will find this out next week at the conference. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to wrap up a little bit by talking about opportunities for folks to get involved. There are data and specimen repositories that are that investigators can submit proposals for. These are for completed studies, and they can submit concept sheets to use that data for studies that have been completed. So you can go onto the ACTG Clinical Trials Network website, and there are forms to download and complete if you have a concept that you would like to evaluate using data from studies that have been completed or specimens. Next slide, please. And I also wanted to put in a word for our CAB. We have an amazing, wonderful community advisory board, and we are always looking for others who are living with HIV who would be interested in joining. It's an amazing way to learn about the clinical research problem, voice questions and concerns regarding clinical research studies, and contribute your knowledge and perspective and experience. So if you are interested, please reach out to us, and the contact is there on the bottom of the slide. And then lastly, if you're interested in joining any of our research studies. So if you go to the Whitman Walker impact.org Institute Research Studies, or just Google Whitman Walker Research. If you go to the research tab, there's a research recruitment survey. You can see all of our studies, not only our ACTG studies, but our other studies. And even if there's a study that you aren't interested in, but you want to be notified of research opportunities down the road, you can enter your information and we will reach out to you if something becomes available that you might be interested in. So research wouldn't happen without the participants who really volunteer their time and effort to help us make these advances. So thank you very much. And I will hand it over to Mark.
Thank you, Sarah. I am going to share my slides. Oh, okay. All right, can everybody see that? Yes, no?
It's
Yes.
the presenter mode.
Ah, that always happens. Okay, well, maybe, let's just see if I do it this. Nope. Okay, well, maybe I'll go out of this. Yeah, what do I do, Lorena? Display settings?
You click on those. No.
Better?
Actually, maybe try that, but it's on. Oh, there you go.
Beautiful.
Looks great.
Is that good? All right.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm a Luddite. Okay, so thank you for the presentation so far. I'll round out the presentations talking about GW, HPTN, CRS. So I just thought I'd take a couple slides. Melissa's already covered this a little bit, talking about what the HPTN is. So this is a worldwide collaborative clinical trials network. So it was actually established in 2000, and it was established on the work of the HIV Network for Prevention Trials, with a commitment to develop research strategies to reduce the acquisition and transmission of HIV in priority populations, including men who have sex with men, transgender people, patients, people who inject drugs, cisgender women, and adolescents. And in that work, it will, the goal is to focus on integrative strategies, including using antiretrovirals, both for as treatment for prevention, which was shown in the landmark HPTN 052 study, as well as for pre-exposure prophylaxis, such as the 083 study with the use of cabotegravir for prevention, but also to use monoclonal antibodies and to explore the potential for monoclonal antibodies as a form of prevention. Other integrated strategies, including interventions for substance abuse, particularly people who inject drugs. Currently, we're participating in the 094 study, looking at mobile health, integrated mobile health for substance use disorder in patients who inject drugs. And then also behavioral risk reduction interventions, and that includes the 061 study, the Brother study, and the 064 study, the Women's Serial Incidence study, which were the two first studies that we actually participated in here at GW. So it is a global, worldwide network. It has over 80 study sites in 14 countries, including Asia, Europe, Sub-Saharan Africa, South America, and the United States. This picture of the sites is actually a little old. It's from 2021. And there's at least, I think, 28 sites in the US. But again, this slide is a little bit older and may not incorporate all the study sites. Currently, the HPTN has carried out over 50 studies. There are still 12 currently ongoing studies, and there are 7 studies which are actually currently in development, which we will be participating in at least one of those. Hopefully that will start before the end of the year, which is the 102 study, which I'll mention briefly at the end. So who are we? We are actually collaboration between 2 different schools or 2 different organizations at GW. So in 2008, Dr. Magnus got approached by the HPTN to become a protocol-specific research site for 2 behavioral studies, which I just mentioned, the HPTN 061 study, the brother study, and the 064 study, the women's seroincidence study. Dr. Magnus became the CRS leader and was very successful with a team in enrolling over 200 participants at GW in both those sites. In 2011, Dr. Magnus actually approached Dr. Simon, who was then the division director at the Division of Infectious Diseases here, about the GW MFA, which is an independent multi-specialty group with over 52 medical and surgical specialties and for over 450 medical and surgical providers. So Dr. Magnus came to us as to be a clinical site for the 069 study, which was the next PrEP study, looking at using Maraviroc as an alternative to Truvada and emtricitabine as for PrEP. And so that started our collaboration, and I was lucky enough to be a junior faculty member at that point, and I was invited to become the medical co-lead on the 069 study, and have been very grateful for the fruitful collaboration that we've had ever since then, since we have now completed or are in the process of completing our 12th HPTN study, and it's been an extremely successful and fruitful relationship. Next slide. Oh, that's me. So how do we kind of separate out the activities between the two organizations, between the school, Milton School of Public Health and the GW Medical Faculty Associates? Well, so first and foremost, we both are committed to ensuring adherence to and study specific to the study protocol and the study specific procedure. So, that is something that we as clinicians and the School of Public Health as kind of the regulatory oversight in the studies are committed to. The School of Public Health is mostly responsible for advertising and recruiting in our studies, pre-screening the participants, and then when the participants come in, helping with the screening, the non-clinical screening activities, mostly performing the consenting and making sure the participants are eligible for the studies, and then also doing the other behavioral parts of the study, including risk reduction and adherence counseling. That they help with the completion of case report forms and reporting of any severe adverse events that we see on the study, and if it happens, reporting a protocol deviation, although our site blessedly has very few of those. And then also is very important in all the data management and the quality control and quality assurance of all the data that we have. As far as the GW Medical Faculty Associates, so we are the clinical site, so we see the participants, obtain their medical history, perform their physical exams, and then do any phlebotomy procedures. We coordinate with the Investigational Drug Services Research Pharmacy to make sure that the study products are being prepared on time. And then we obviously do the administration of any of the investigational products, and those can include oral medications. They can include IM injections like injectable cabotegravir. We've done subcutaneous and intravenous infusions of monoclonal antibodies, and then also vaccination studies through the HPTN. And then if any patient has an adverse event, we obviously will then evaluate that participant and determine whether that adverse event is related to the study product or not. So this is the current location of where the School of Public Health is located. So we have an office on L Street. We've moved in within the last year. It's a beautiful office with offices, plenty of space. We actually have a very large meeting room, which at the time I took the picture was in use by one of our monitors. But we meet at least once a week, and we meet both as both the School of Public Health and the clinicians from the MFA come together, and we basically go through all our active studies, talk about any issues that are going on, and also talk about retention of our study participants as well. So the School of Public Health is made up predominantly of graduates from the School of Public Health, as well as doctoral students, postdoctoral students, as well as faculty members from the School of Public Health, and they're listed here. We also have social workers and a driver who drives the mobile health, the mobile unit that we're using in the 094 study. And the clinical activities are carried out at the Medical Faculty Associates, where I'm the CRS leader, and I have 3 co-investigators, and we have a research staff that is made up of research coordinators, physicians assistants, nurse practitioners, and they, do the bulk of the clinical work. They're also the clinicians that go out on the mobile unit, and are really, vital and extremely good at what they do as far as seeing the participants and performing all the clinical activities and adhering to the protocol. We also have a IDS, Investigational Drug Services Research Pharmacy, who we have a strong relationship with, and they're obviously also vital to us being able to carry out these studies. And in the bottom right is just a picture of one of the exam rooms where we do the IV infusions. We have a phlebotomy chair. That's where we also do the subcutaneous and the intravenous infusions of the monoclonal antibodies. And that is just one of many of our exam rooms that we have. So our mission at the GW, HPT, and CRS is to really help bring an end to the HIV epidemic, and by focusing on HIV prevention efforts on those populations who are at the highest risk and with the highest prevalence of HIV infections. We want to benefit individual participants as well as the local community through dissemination of these novel research studies. And we also want to help benefiting the scientific community using through trials that we believe will contribute to new interventions for HIV prevention. And then we're committed to ensuring recruitment of a diverse sample of patients, patients at risk for HIV, and also having a high retention of our participants, and also exemplary clinical data. And we excel at the quality of our clinical data, and that's a testament to the School of Public Health as far as that. We also want to help support and contribute to the research priorities of the HPTN itself, and these are the 4 aims of the HPTN, and those are to design and conduct studies of long-acting antiretroviral agents and delivery systems for pre-exposure prophylaxis. And an example of that is the 083 study, which showed the efficacy, the superiority of injectable cabotegravir for prevention, to design and conduct studies to evaluate multi-purpose prevention technologies that prevent HIV in pregnancy, sexually transmitted infections, and opioid dependence, and then to design and conduct studies in collaboration with the HIV Vaccine Trials Network, or the HVTN, to evaluate broadly neutralizing antibodies, or the BNABs, either alone or in combination. And we've now participated in 2 of those studies, and will hopefully be participating in an upcoming study in the near future. And then also to design and conduct integrated strategies for HIV prevention. So I'm not going to go through all these studies. I've already mentioned a lot of them, but these are the 12 HPTN studies that we've participated in. Some are still ongoing. The ones with an asterisk are still ongoing. And I already mentioned the first 2 studies, the 061 and 064 studies, which was really our gateway into the HPTN. And then, the studies that we're obviously very proud of, our participation in 083, which basically has been a landmark shift in how the efficacy of PrEP. We also participated in 085, which was the AMP study, which was the first study to look at the use of a monoclonal antibody for HIV prevention. And then, as Dr. Magnus mentioned earlier, we got in 2020 with the establishment of the CoVPN, we got asked to become a site for the Moderna study, or the COVE study. And with the leadership of Dr. David D. Mert, we enrolled not only one of the highest number of participants here, but also one of the most diverse participant populations, which is really important because, the CoVPN was well aware that a study that showed the efficacy of a vaccine in a majority white population would not necessarily be acceptable to the general population. And so I really have to commend Dr. D. Mert for his leadership on that. I also want to point out the 094 study, which I've already mentioned, which was the mobile health unit to provide integrative health for both HIV prevention, HIV treatment, and hepatitis C treatment. And we're one of 5 sites, and we just got recognized at the annual HPTN meeting for our abilities, our recruitment and retention, enrolling for the study that basically started in the middle of the COVID pandemic. It started in May of 2021. And obviously there were a lot of challenges with that, but we persevered, and we overcame some obstacles and have a very strong team that's involved with that. So I passed off to that team. The last study, the one with the double asterisk, is a 102 study, which we're excited to hopefully start enrolling participants in before the end of the year. And this is looking at a long-term subcutaneous injection of a medicine, and a new medicine called lenacapavir, which is medicine currently approved for HIV treatment. It's given as a subcutaneous injection every 6 months. And so this is going to be looked at, it's called a capsid inhibitor. It has 3 mechanisms of action in patients living with HIV. And so this is currently being looked at in 2 studies, the Purpose 1 and Purpose 2 studies, in men who are at risk, men who have sex with men, and also looking at adolescents and young women in Africa. And so this will be the phase 2 study looking at lenacapavir in cisgender women at risk for HIV in the US. And our target enrollment for that is 25 women, cisgender women. And we hopefully, like I said, will start enrolling for that sometime towards the end of this year. So lastly, one thing I wanted to say, so looking at all the studies we've participated in, I calculated that we've enrolled more than 1,000 participants in all our studies with a retention rate of 95%, which I think, again, is a testament to the leadership of Dr. Magnus and the strong team she has established. And I think we can be incredibly proud of those accomplishments. Lastly, similar to what Dr. Hen said, as far as opportunities for community engagement, we welcome people to come and join our HIV prevention CAB meetings, which happen on a quarterly basis. We also would be happy for any participation in our outreach activities at local community-based organizations, which will be important for the 102 studies when we start recruiting for that. We also will welcome any help promoting our study to local populations who are at increase for HIV acquisition, including young Black MSM, transgender people, and people who inject drugs. And similar to what Dr. Hen said, we welcome anybody who wants to be a participant in any of our research studies. I am remiss that we don't have such a nice website as Whitman Walker, but I thought about how that will be one of the next things I will commit to doing, is getting a research site up where people can go and look at the GW, HPTN, CRS, and see what active studies we have and what studies are available for enrollment in. And with that, I'd like to say thank you. I noticed that my phone number was not listed when Melissa listed everybody's phone number, so that is the direct line if you want to reach out to me about anything research related or anything prevention related. And with that, I turn it back to Dr. Magnus, and I appreciate your attention.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mark, Sarah, and Melissa. What a terrific. Oh, there's a little echo.
No, it was me. I was just trying to stop the share, but I think it stopped. Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. Anyway, that was terrific. It's so exciting. I think we have about 15 minutes. You can feel the excitement of the DCCTU, and we have this wonderful benefit of having through 2027 to work on this cycle. So we're just delighted to entertain any questions you have. Feel free to ask us, ask our team members. We're here and ready to take questions. And you can just call out, or if you prefer to raise your hand or use the chat. And I like the idea. I think there we go. George, go ahead, please.
Good evening. Thank you for these incredible presentations. I think they were really valuable and I learned a lot. And I'm just wondering, I heard Mark talk about building a website, and I know Whitman Walker has a website, but I'm just wondering if there's a way that we can combine and have one place so people can do linkage to these different research that's going on. I think that would be beneficial for our community.
So much, George. So in fact, we have the capacity to do that thanks to Christian's amazing work. So I think the next step, I love, Sarah, that was brilliant. I don't think I knew that you had that little survey. So I think what we can do is we have to get, of course, institutional review board approval to make sure that we can recruit that way. But I think that maybe we can take what Christian's already done. We have on our website, if you go to dcctu.org, we do have all the trials that are open. We have all the trials that are completed, but we don't have a little, sign up link like you have, Sarah. So I think that would be a great next step. And again, this is all kind of formative. We're learning and growing. So I love that suggestion. I don't know if Melissa, Mark, or Sarah have other ideas.
Let's work on it. Do I have
I think it's sorely needed.
let's see if we can work on that. So there's some more intentional collaboration between the social media identities of our two linked sites in our CTU. Let's see if we can do that.
I think the foundation is set. So now I think we just really have to just make one little addition to that website. And I think then we could link to Whitman Walkers and we could link to the IRB approval that we get now. So we can do that. So I love that idea. Of course, it takes someone younger than me because I'm way too old to be a social media expert, but I'm going to engage the next gen to help here. Dr. Greenberg.
A comment and a question. First, I just wanted to thank our speakers. You've been doing all this amazing work for the past decade or more, quietly going about changing the world with Moderna trials and PrEP trials and injectable PrEP trials. And I just want to express my gratitude to you for communicating everything you were doing so clearly to the broader community. And this will be online as well, and we'll do our best to publicize your incredible work. My question is, could you tell us a little more about how you decide what of all the trials going on in these big international networks, how you decide which trials your two CRSs are going to actually participate in?
Maybe we can start with Sarah, because I think the ACTG and HPTN are siblings, but like most siblings, they're totally different. So maybe we can start with Sarah and then go to Mark.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question because we have to be really strategic when we think about which trials we're going to do. I think, when you think of the comorbidities of people living with HIV, we think of some of, we see people struggling with memory. We see people struggling with metabolic complications. We see cardiovascular disease. So we look at those trials that are really affecting large proportions of the community we serve, and we try to get engaged in those trials, and those become a priority for us. But then when we look at the cure trials, I think that's also very important, but those are very specific trials. They're very small trials. They're very time-intensive trials. And the ACTG has numerous of these cure studies going on. And so for us, it doesn't make sense to participate in all of them because the lift is too great and the recruitment numbers are very small. So we try to target one or two of those that we do and that we can then focus on. So that's largely how we go about it.
From the HP10 standpoint, I mean, initially, we were being asked to participate in a lot of the studies because of the amazing recruitment and retention and the quality of our data that we had. And, these were studies that were important, like the 073 study, because that was a study that was focused purely on Black MSM. Prior to that, the IFREC study, which was a landmark study, it really had a very poor representation of Black men. And so we knew that was an important study. We were in a city that had a large Black population that we felt like we had the ability to recruit from, and we very successfully were one of the 3 sites that recruited 225 participants into that. When we were invited to participate in the monoclonal antibody studies, that definitely was a shift for us. That was going from phase 2 and phase 3 studies into phase 1 studies. And it took a little soul searching to decide whether that was something that we felt comfortable doing, but we decided, I think it was important. It was, the AMP study had been ongoing, and we decided that I thought we could contribute to that, and we did have the resources to do that. And that's actually been very fruitful because on the heels of the AMP study and 092 study, I was invited to become the co-chair of the 101 study. And I think, it's taught me a lot about the feasibility of some of these studies. And I think, I've been helpful to kind of guide some of the leadership as to the viability of maybe whether subcutaneous infusions of monoclonal antibodies are even worth pursuing. And I think there's a kind of a sense that based on clinical experience that maybe we need to focus on just IV infusions. So I think that, looking at where we can contribute and further science and and help kind of guide the HPTN and how they're going to frame their future studies and what studies they're going to pursue in development as being part of that. And then, studies that we just believe, I always believe that an injectable form of PrEP would be superior to an oral PrEP pill, just because I knew that compliance has always been the issue. And so when we had the opportunity to do 083, that was pretty much a no-brainer. I was very excited that we were selected, and I was very happy to see that, my gut instinct was right, that it was not, it was initially made as a non-inferiority study, but it was so convincingly superior that they could show that it was superior. And that's difficult to do, but that's a testament to how much more effective it is. And so kind of a belief in the science and knowing what science predicts should work.
Thank you. And one more question for Melissa. Melissa, many of us know you've been involved in the international oversight of the HPTN trials for many years. How do you take lessons learned on the international stage and apply them locally here in our community, and vice versa? What lessons have you taken from our local community in your work at the VA and with the trials here and applied those on an international stage?
Yes, there's so much to learn from the international perspective, so much to gain. And they have a number of strengths that they can share about how they develop workarounds and how they might operate in systems where there might be fewer resources in some circumstances. And we have a great deal to learn from our international colleagues. We were just discussing at the HPTN this week about how we can leverage our relationships with communities to communicate health facts when there is so much misinformation in our local communities, even from our political leaders. And our international colleagues have been able to share some strategies about how we can adopt some of those methodologies here in the continental United States, where misinformation has been a difficulty, particularly with the COVID agenda and with Mpox too, I'll have to say. And there's still misinformation in the world around HIV as well. Transmission and what all these injectable products can do. So I think our international colleagues have been very helpful in helping us to learn how we can leverage our relationships to impart the facts in plain language to our communities. And the VA has some expertise in working with aging populations. The VA population tends to be a little bit older, living with HIV on average, I believe. And so we have some expertise in that area to inform the field that we've been able to leverage. And so we have rich experience inside the CTU with our team here. We have rich experience. I don't think I realized that Avery, for example, was leading the site operations for the ACTG. I don't think I realized that. That's very impressive, really outstanding, Avery. And just the other day at the HPTN meeting, GW won an award for its participant retention. And the people who inject drugs study. Very, very, very difficult to retain participants in these studies. So we have great expertise here to share and to build out our CTU, from the leadership to the coordinators, to our team members, to our communities. We have great expertise here to leverage to lift innovative work in our CTU, and I'm very proud to be a part of it.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for that great question. In the interest of making sure we honor everyone's time, I just think this would be a terrific time to turn it back to Alan and to take us on home. But I just want to thank so much these wonderful collaborators that my life is enriched from being able to collaborate with everyone on this call who's part of the team, and with Melissa and Mark and Sarah and Hannah and Avery and Sydney. And I see so many of our team. I can't even see because there's so many of you on the call, but I just want to say it's a great honor to be able to work with the community on this incredible work. So thank you, Dr. Greenberg, for having us here. I turn it back to you to close us out.
Sure. Well, thank you for sharing the incredible work you're doing. We'll try our best to get the word out and try to publicize your great work through whatever channels we have, and just the incredible commitment and long-term commitment that each of you have to our DC community is very moving and certainly consistent with the greater mission of ending the epidemic in Washington. So just a gratitude to you. We will to everyone else who hung in there for an hour and a half. Thank you for your participation this evening. We will be in touch with our next. I think this session points out the value in having some of these big projects that are being done in DC publicized in this way and letting people know about it. You've all been so transparent, so open, and you've shared your email addresses and phone numbers, and I'm sure you're going to be getting a lot of follow-up inquiries. So thanks to everyone who spoke, and thanks to everyone who participated, and be in touch with our next seminar series, citywide seminars in the weeks ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.